If your creative push has helped you, you can help the show by becoming a patron on Patreon. For $20, $10, $5, or $1 a month, you can not only show your support of the podcast, but also do so much to help to cover all the costs. Head to yourcreativepush.com/Patreon to find out all of the goodies that you can get when you become a patron at each of the levels, and thank you in advance for helping this show. The 5 steps to creating your scary idea. Your Creative Push, episode 200. Hello and welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I am your host, Youngman Brown, and today's episode is episode 200, something that I cannot believe has come already in a little bit over 13 months of this podcast. Kind of insane. 200 is a big number. It seems like just yesterday it was episode 100, and it seems like the day before that it was episode 1. So for me, this is kind of like a really happy celebration, and what we're going to do is look at what I consider to be the 5 stages or steps of creating ideas, and specifically scary ideas. And all 5 of these steps kind of merge together, but I tried to separate them a little bit, and just so you can see how easy it actually is and how easy it can be to create those scary ideas, perhaps that you have just gotten or that have been in kind of stewing in your head for many years. And step 1, we're going to get right into, is actually the idea itself. It's that easy. So for the purpose of this episode, I want to talk about ideas that you just get. Not necessarily about sitting down and starting, which is super important, and sometimes those ideas are scary as well. The ideas that you come up with when you're actually setting out to do the work. But for this episode, I want to talk about those ideas that you get kind of in a flash of inspiration. And those are so often the ones that we shake off because they're so weird, they're so out there, or they're so big, so grand, so scary, or so different. And to illustrate kind of what I mean, let's listen to Tom Harold, who makes these rolling ball sculptures. And I asked him how he got started, or what kind of gave him the inspiration to make these rolling ball sculptures. And here's what he had to say.
We have a children's museum here, and I went with my nieces when they were 5 years old, and they have a science center there, and they have a pretty large rolling ball sculpture there that has billiard balls in it. And I looked at that thing, and it had, I think it's got 3 or 4 or 5 different tracks on it. One of them's motorized and runs all the time without anybody doing anything to it. Another track has this great big auger, which I know I've looked this stuff up myself for my own pieces. I know they got this thing. It's for some like garden implement or something like that. It was this screw auger that was like 6 or 8 inches across. And you could turn this crank and it functioned as a lift. The balls would come in at the bottom and you turn this crank and the auger would screw the balls up this ramp towards the top. And there was like so much. It was painted all these different colors, and it had bells on it and wood blocks on it and all these crazy curves and a jump and I just looked at the whole thing, and I was amazed that somebody had obviously put an immense amount of time into building a machine that it didn't make cell phones. It didn't make tennis shoes. It didn't provide you with television. It didn't do any of this stuff that machines are all created for this purpose. Old steam engines are a really good example of that. They're the earliest of farm implements were a lot of those sorts of machines at the dawn of the machine era. They had a lot of, I wish I could have been one of those guys. They were designed with this inherent attractiveness to them, and somebody had built this machine, and it didn't do. I stood back and looked at it, and I said, "This machine does absolutely nothing practical, and it's the greatest thing that anyone has ever created." I said that out loud. I just was like in the moment with this thing. It's like, this is it. This is like the, the center of the universe for me. I just thought it was so, so cool. And it struck me that this machine made this fabulous transition where everyone who looked at it could understand what I felt when I looked at machinery. Like if I look at, when I now spend a lot of time on, Instagram looking at stuff like this. If I'm looking at a 3.2 barrel setup on a 389 Pontiac motor, and if somebody's like working over the linkage on that, or like a Hillborn fuel injection system or whatever, I'm like, this is so awesome. This is, and nobody else but car guys get that. And I thought it was so fantastic that this machine took these mechanical processes and made them so fun and enjoyable. It was like this great translation machine for, the joy of mechanics and motion. And I was like, this is genius. This is it. This is why I like this sort of stuff. So that was the beginning as far as interest went. And then, you would think like, oh, so I went home and I started building stuff. I did nothing. I went home and did nothing at all. I don't remember what I think at the time I was in a job that I really hated. And I went home and I went back to that job and I just went back to hating my job.
Now, there's a happy ending to Tom's story because now he's doing it, and doing it very well. But I think it's such a great example of seeing something that is the greatest thing in the world. You see it as this thing that just inspires you and fills you with awe, and then going home and doing nothing. And Tom went on in the episode to talk about all the different excuses, all the different things that he used to let himself off the hook, whether it was not knowing how to weld or just not having enough time or having another full-time job that was sucking up all of his time. And I think that it's individual for everyone, the kind of resistance that we talk about all the time in this podcast, the excuses that you make up in your head while these ideas are stewing around. And that leads us into step 2 already, which is resistance. And I think that this is the most important, the most kind of critical component to these 5 stages, because oftentimes it's the one we are stuck in the longest. And I think it's often overlooked as not a part of the creative process, not a part of this journey that an idea goes through from inception to creation. But I think it is an important part of this whole process and something that you have to treat with respect and expect it to come. Like I said, it's like the theme, the whole reason that my podcast exists, because of this stage 2 that I was stuck in for so long. And I think it holds a lot of people back, and especially people that probably aren't seeking out this podcast because they don't even realize that they are a creative person that just keeps pushing away these ideas that they have. Because it can stop you in your tracks as soon as you get an idea, before you even realize that you've started the creative process by getting an idea, which is oftentimes such a lucky break, such a lucky thing to happen. And we sometimes just shun away this idea because it is either too scary, too big of an idea, too small of an idea. It's never been done before. It has been done before. We don't know how to do it. We don't know how it will change our lives if we actually make this thing. We don't know what people will say about us. There is just an impossibly long list of excuses that you can make, and excuses that you don't even consciously make. Sometimes it's the idea comes in and you're like, nope, that's stupid. Bye idea. And it's gone forever. And sometimes people let this idea manifest a while and get really super creative in their brains about how this idea might, transcend other ideas or combine with other fields and be a game changer. And then the bigger this idea blows up, it kind of blows up in this like big bubble. And the bigger it gets, the more scared they get of it. They're like, this bubble is definitely going to pop at any moment in this kind of imaginary situation that I've created. And they pop it themselves. They say that will never work. They don't even mention it out loud to a spouse, a trusted friend, a girlfriend, a boyfriend. They don't even say it out loud to themselves. They don't even make it a realistic notion in their own brains as they're actually thinking it. As soon as the idea pops into their heads and into my head as well, this happens all the time, It's like that idea is like a virus and it immediately gets attacked by all the resistances in your brain. And that kind of makes sense because your ego doesn't want you to be hurt. It doesn't want you to get shot down if you were to take this thing that just germinated in your brain and bring it into the public. So it shuts that shit down and it keeps you on your slow and steady path of hitting play on Netflix or grabbing the next beer or whatever it is that you do to kind of shun these big ideas, these life-changing ideas often away, and just forgetting about this revelation that you just had that made you hit pause while you're watching a show. Now, this whole show, this whole podcast is themed because of this resistance, and I ask almost every single guest what are the things that hold them back in their daily creative processes, or used to hold them back when they were first starting out. So you can go back and listen to literally any of the episodes and find out how varied it is for different people, and also how similar some of them are too. That's very inspiring. So I could play you a bazillion examples, but I just narrowed it down to one. Julie Xantopoulos talking about the thing that holds her back, the doubts and indecision, and how she gets through that.
My worst creative moments didn't ever come from negative comments or people criticizing short stories or articles that I published. It never came from, opposition in the discussions in the comments or anything like that. And it never even came from family or friends who didn't understand like my time commitment to writing. My worst moments where I doubted myself, my writing, like everything, it's always been internally based. The times I felt crappiest about my own creative process have been when I let myself doubt my creative process or my talents. And I think as a writer and as a creator, there's such a tendency to live in your own head. And I think that also stems from my background as a psychology major. Like I'm always very introspective and trying to figure out like the source of my motivations and make sure that I'm kind of checking in with myself. And not every check-in is a positive one. And sometimes I live too much in those negative headspaces. And when I doubted myself or my direction, that's always been the most difficult for me because it's a hard cycle to break.
How do you break it?
That's a great question. I think that it comes with time. It comes with experience. And I think that pushing through, I don't think that you ever stop doubting yourself. I mean, I still doubt myself. I doubted myself when I started the book tour. I doubted myself the whole time. And I think that the only way to break that is to push through. So you do it even though you're afraid of it. And when you do it even though you're afraid of it, you gain such strength. And when you do it even though you're afraid of it, then you realize you can do it and you can do it well, and that there's, the margin for success is so much greater than the margin for error and failure. Every time you do that and you just push through and do it anyway, your confidence grows. And I personally, at this point in my journey, after doing so many things that went outside my comfort zone, get such a high, like a really kind of ridiculous high off of doing things that scare me or doing things that I never thought I could. Now I'm like always constantly looking for like that next thing that scares the absolute shit out of me. But there's a switch that flips and you stop seeing those obstacles as insurmountable and you're scared. But I think that fear is a great motivator. And eventually, you start to learn that being afraid of something doesn't mean that it's not something you should do. Sometimes that is still the right thing.
Now, as difficult and as long as phase 2 sometimes lasts whenever you get an idea, like I said, sometimes years, I think there's a cheat, and it's step 3, and it's a way to sometimes breeze past step 2 or just completely skip step 2 the more you practice this step 3. And it's the easiest step in the world. It's writing it down or saying it out loud, and especially writing it down. I think it's the most critical step in the creative process because it's the actual thing that gets the idea started, the actual thing that puts the idea from this idea into this real tangible thing that you've written down. And the most important part of this step is not thinking about anything. It's just getting the idea and writing it down. Because even without resistance, ideas are fleeting. They are like dreams. If you don't have a habit of writing them down, you will totally forget about them. And that's happened to me a million times because ideas come with excitement. You get that idea and sometimes your heart can skip a beat. And that can spur on an idea, kind of like hitting a ball up in the air with like a paddle ball, hitting it up and down. That idea has like a life to it and like a movement to it. So when that idea is fresh and it's kind of up in the air like that, and you have that excitement, use that paddle and keep hitting that idea up as long as it will last, as long as you can get that spur of excitement. Write as much shit down as you can about it and let it take you for a ride. You kind of give it the reins and just keep writing. Don't have any judgment about how good the idea is, because perhaps the actual meat of the idea, the heart of the idea, is yet to come. You've only seen a little piece of this idea. Just get it down. It's the most important step, but strangely, it requires the least amount of effort as well as the least amount of vulnerability. All you have to do is write that down, but you don't have to worry about the vulnerability because you don't have to show it to anyone. You don't have to tell anyone about it. It could be the most idiotic idea that anyone has ever thought, but nobody gets to see it. And I think that's the real takeaway from all of this, all these stages, this entire episode, is that transition from a thought in your mind to a thought written down on paper. That transition is harmless. It is not going to kill you if you write down a stupid idea. You can just crumple it up and throw it away or save it to when it might actually be a good idea once you have different knowledge or another idea that combines with it so well. But at the same time, even though it's harmless, it's so powerful to be able to do that. You get a natural tendency, a natural understanding for what a good idea is and what a bad idea is. And you might realize that you can turn a lot of those ideas into something, or a lot of those ideas will turn into something useful to you in ways that you never would have expected had you not started to expand upon those ideas, not just through your brain and coming up with all those excuses, but via your fingers and kind of a continued thinking, keeping that ball moving, as it were. And not only that, but your brain will also make this connection of writing things down. Like I said, it's like dreams. And the best way to remember your dreams is to have a dream journal, like right next to your bed, and getting in the habit of, as soon as you wake up, thinking, what did I just dream? Asking yourself that question. And if your brain recognizes the fact that it's come up with an idea, you won't subconsciously put that idea away without even really evaluating it. You'll be like, okay, here's an idea. Let me write it down. And that transition has to be as smooth as possible without the resistance seeping in. And if you can get into the habit of introducing step 3 as early as possible, it can completely wipe out step 2, or at least wipe it out in the idea making process. Because when ideas pop up, you're excited, but it's also, the idea is weak. You know, it's this little baby of an idea. And I think that resistance loves to eat baby ideas. They're like veal for it. They can't help themselves. They just want to attack that thing like a pack of wolves. And the resistance monsters love eating those ideas up. They're very yummy. So instead, start nurturing that idea right away by birthing it, pulling it out onto paper, and making it a real thing. Make it stronger and give it that nourishment to make it fight back against resistance. And I've got 2 really good examples of this. One's from Andrew T. Kearns, an awesome photographer. I love watching his vlogs. And he talks about his New Year's resolutions, and his last one being think less, do more.
Another one is to think less and do more. That can also be said as don't overthink stuff as much and just less thinking and more action. It's easy to think about all these ideas and have these ideas, but everyone has ideas. Like I have a bazillion ideas. Like everyone listening to this podcast probably has a bazillion ideas, but those don't matter until there's action behind those ideas, you know? Like, I think that is really one thing I need to really take to heart this year is, hey, if I have this shoot idea, like, okay, stop imagining it in my head and going out and doing it. Hey, I want to like live out of my car for most of this year. Like, okay, cool. Like, take action, do it. You know, I think that's huge right now for me because I don't do that. I overthink stuff too easily, or I think about and romanticize ideas too much rather than action.
It's 4 powerful words. Think less, do more. But it's so true. And I think the less you really think about the end result of this thing, the better you'll be. And also the more you'll get done, the more bad ideas you'll go through to get to those good ones. And another really perfect example of this whole writing it down or just getting it onto paper without really having too much expectations comes from Kelly Killigan. When I asked her about this cat/dog-like sculpture that I really love that she's done, and asked her kind of where that idea came from.
It's interesting because my initial concept was a cat. And that entire project, my entire thesis is basically based around this little doodle that I did in my sketchbook when I was totally art blocked. I didn't know what I was going to do. I had like all these different ideas and I couldn't narrow it down. So I just started doodling for fun. And it was this really, is really simple and not even attractive looking cat. Definitely had like a cat tail and paws. And then it had like a really ugly hand for a head. And then I drew that over and over again. Some of them were like crowd surfing, like cats on hands. And it was just so strange. But then, I had a really awesome mentor who told me to sculpt them because once you cross that barrier, like when it's a drawing, it's funny and interesting. But once you make it come alive, it suddenly takes a turn and it gets really serious. And that's kind of what happened. What I did was I thought I was going to go into it as this cat sculpture with a hand for a head. But what ended up happening was I took a bunch of references of greyhounds because I liked their body shapes. I liked how you could see their muscles. And I feel like sculpting a cat is really difficult. And it's just a big mush ball, basically. It's fuzzy and I'm working in clay. And I didn't see these things as being fuzzballs. I saw them as kind of stoic creatures, almost like a sphinx would be. So I used greyhound references. So then the cat image kind of morphed into a dog. So it's a little bit of both. And I made sure that I tried not to zero in on one or the other. And everyone who has ever come across these pieces have called it either a cat or a dog. And I wonder if it's because of their experience. Maybe if they're a cat person, they call it a cat. If they're a dog person, they call it a dog. I'm not sure, but they're a little bit of both.
And I love Kelly's story so much because it's just a perfect example of how a doodle that you're not really thinking about can turn into this thing that becomes a senior thesis, that becomes a work of art that's in a completely different medium than a doodle. You never know where those ideas are going to take you. You just got to let them take you somewhere. You have to actually bring them out into the world in one way or another. And if you can write it down, get in that habit. If there's nothing else I can teach you today or inspire you or encourage you to do, it's just writing stuff down, no matter what field you're in. It's the most powerful tool that you can use to start that creative process, especially if you are struggling to get ideas. Write all the bad ideas down, and then you'll be in the habit of writing ideas down so that you're not wondering why ideas aren't coming to you. You can always look back at those ideas and see if something clicks later on. Just get a notebook, get anything, get a Word document, whatever it is. Just put content into the world. That's all you have to do. Get those fingers typing, get the pencil moving. Just be active. And if you are that kind of a antenna for the universe to give you ideas, we've talked about this on the show too. It's one of my favorite things. If it knows that you are a person who is looking for ideas, the ideas will start coming to you. So you just got to get in the habit of being a person that puts those ideas into the world. So step 4, we are already on the 4th stage of creativity, and it isn't until now that we start actually making it. Step 4 is creating the idea. And this is a big step, but it's actually the only stage where we actually make the idea into something. And there's certainly a 4A, 4B, 4C stage of this process of making it into a thing. But all of that comes from learning about our medium, understanding our medium, and practicing our medium, at least technically. Creatively, we have to still deal with many different creative blocks, such as laziness, more fears, technical difficulties, technical shortcomings, that list goes on and on. But all of those things become unlocked as we continue this 5-step process of bringing ideas into reality. And that's actually all I have for step 4, because it's really on you at this point, especially if you are brave enough to start the ideas that scare the shit out of you, the ideas that you are the most terrified of. They usually come with extra stuff that you have to learn in this process of learning how to do this new thing or getting the materials to do it. or finding somebody that knows what they're doing to help you a little bit more along this new thing. So often those scary ideas, the reason why they're scary is because it requires all this extra stuff. But all that extra stuff is what makes you grow. If you just do stuff that you're comfortable with, you're not going to grow and expand as a creative person, as an artist, as a musician, as a writer. You have to keep challenging yourself to push the bar further. And that's where these ideas come from. They're ideas that help you to grow. So you'll learn all the things that you don't know as you start creating it, as you go down this path that started out by writing it down, even though you were scared of it. And before we move on to step 5, I'd also like to note that during this process, don't be afraid to write other ideas down. If you get that like spur of excitement again for something else as you're learning how to do this new thing, or as you're going down this new path that you haven't done before, and you're seeing all these possibilities of other things that you can do, don't be afraid to take the time to write those ideas down, because as I said, they are sometimes fleeting. You might not get that idea down later. Obviously continue doing this one thing, this new path that you set out for yourself, this new creative project, this new pursuit. Obviously go full steam ahead with that, but don't be afraid to take a short break to get those other ideas down, because this creative process can really open you up to new thoughts, new ideas. And as I said, sometimes that's the most important thing, especially if the idea that you're currently doing doesn't end up being that great. Now you have a whole arsenal of other ideas that have given you these new branches to go out on. And don't be afraid to go out on those branches for a moment just to get those ideas down and start building that idea database, starting other processes in the future. And phase 5, publishing it or sharing it. And I was going to leave this step out because I know if you know that this step is waiting for you at the end of the creative process, that can slow you down or make your idea change as you're creating it because you're thinking about your audience or your potential audience. But I think it's also a very necessary step for creative people. And I'd say don't consider it an optional step, but like a bonus step, like to try to see it as a fun step. And it really is fun, like a reward that you get to give to yourself for bringing your idea into existence, for going through all 5 steps. It's scary. It's scary as shit, but you have to do it and you have to keep doing it. You have to keep sharing. And Lisa Congdon has a lot to say about this when I ask her that specific question, how people that are uncomfortable sharing and how she, when she's uncomfortable sharing, does it anyway.
We all know that person who's so talented. Like maybe they went to art school or maybe they've just been drawing since they were 10, but they're like so talented, but they don't particularly care about being successful, or they are not interested in promoting their work. So they're not making a living at it. Conversely, we all sort of have that person in our mind who we think, I could draw better than them, or, I'm a better artist than they are, but they're so successful. And it's because they're really good at promoting themselves. And I often sort of say, like, I'm self-taught. I don't have like the most refined technical skill in the world, but I'm pretty successful. And part of that is because from the beginning, I sort of understood that in order to make, to advance my art career, I needed to put my work into the world, even when it wasn't perfect. And so there's this way that you sort of have to plod through, even when you could be doing a slightly better job.
And would you have any advice? Because I think that's one of the scariest things for creative people is to, put themselves into a work that's not 100% what they envisioned or 100% what they think is the perfect version of the thing that they set out to create. Do you have any advice for then, like you said, to being brave enough to put that out into the world so that you can continue to grow?
Yeah, I think that understanding that, I think we imagine as creative people that everyone else has it all figured out, or at least people who we imagine are ahead of us on the path or on the journey to become a successful artist. What I discovered is, because I used to think that, like this person who I admire, who's been doing this for 5 years longer than I have, or went to, the Rhode Island Institute of Design and, studied under all of these really amazing teachers, like they've got it figured out and I just need to figure out what they know. Or I just need to get to the place where I'm as confident as them before I am going to feel really good about putting my work into the world. But what I realized after I sort of eventually got to that place where they were, I caught up to them on the path, was that they probably more than likely didn't have it figured out either. And that we all sort of realize that we could be making better work. We could be making work that in our mind's eye is anything like better, less commercial, more commercial, whatever, like different than what we're doing. And I think we imagine that someday we'll get in a place where everything will flow and be easy and we'll be making exactly the kind of work we want to make and putting it out into the world will feel easy, but it never gets easier. Like even now I'm working for big name clients and I'm represented by a gallery, but I still sort of struggle with insecurity about putting my work into the world. It still feels vulnerable, but I think the key is I do it anyway. And I have been since the beginning. I sort of fight the urge to hide and instead I'll, draw something that I know is imperfect and I still put it out into the world. Sometimes because I have a deadline for a client and it's just gotta go, right? It's gotta go to the client. It's as good as it's going to get. Sometimes because I'm experimenting with something and I want to share it just to see how people react to it. So yeah, I think understanding that your work doesn't have to be perfect or your version of perfect before you put it into the world and sort of pushing through the anxiety that comes with the vulnerability of sharing stuff is just something you have to do. You have to practice it over and over and over.
Lisa is so right. And I think the other thing is that praise comes way more often than hate. And one of the things we talk about all the time on the show is how one hurtful comment just completely kills your motivation to keep creating or to keep sharing. But it is really important to ignore the haters that are hating for just the sake of hating, and really realize how many people are loving it. It's a way better ratio than you imagine it will be. And it's also your job to sift through that hate and pull out the things that people are right about and to ignore the things that they're either wrong about or don't understand. There's going to be trolls, but there's always going to be way more lovers. People that are not only appreciative for the thing that you could bring out into this world, but for your courage to do it, especially when they can only get to the beginning of step 2 and they let the resistances stop them. So it's like you need to be an ambassador for the creative process to show people that it can be done. All you have to do is put those ideas into reality in whatever way works best for you. I think that my man Spio really sums up a lot of the things we were talking about today, and I think it's the perfect kind of sound clip to end this with because it's so important.
To this day, I try to keep my expectations low and just get into it, make something, anything. But like back then, I would say I stumbled for a long while, but I didn't really notice because it was so much fun just putting stuff together and making music and then sharing it and having people listen and comment. Like that took like 2 years until somebody actually listened. Like I was uploading for a long time until someone actually listened to a track. And I was writing to a blank Twitter feed. Like there were 0 followers, but I still tweeted because I had this idea like, yeah, you're going to share your music. And it took a while, but then it was like incredibly gratifying. But I also, like I said, I noticed that the music that I made like a year ago or maybe even a month ago, it was not exactly what, like the reality of the music didn't meet my image in my head of the track because it was so exciting to me. But the execution was kind of lackluster. Even right now, I'm not at a point where I say if I have an idea, I can really faithfully put that into a real thing, put that into a real track. There's still stuff that happens along the way, like with the technicalities where I mess up or where I don't have kind of the full picture. But I also noticed that isn't really that relevant. As long as you're having fun and you're making something cool, it's gonna sound great. So, yeah.
And I think that that's the really most important thing to remember, that this is supposed to be fun. You need to take away those expectations. But when you get an idea, to just get excited that you got an idea. It's so lucky that you get ideas, and just write it down and have fun as you begin to mold it and watch it grow. The fun part is to see if it does actually turn into something, but not being nervous about what it might become or if it will become nothing at all. And to not get discouraged with that last step, to allow ideas to fail. At least you tried, at least you got it out of your head, and at least you can move on to the next idea when it comes. But that is all I've got for you today. Hopefully, this inspired you to go and get your work done. So go and get it done. Take those ideas when you get them. Bring them into the world. It's so important to do. And it will keep you in that mindset of being a creative person, which is what this whole thing is all about. Thank you so much for listening to 200 episodes. I love you guys so much, and I can't wait to do another 100, 200, 1,000 episodes about getting past your creative resistances. If you want links to the episodes that we played today, you can head to yourcreativepush.com/200 to get the show notes and listen to those episodes if you need some more inspiration, or you want to hear the whole episodes or hear them again if you've already heard them and were inspired before. On Thursday, we have Anne Ray with episode 201. You can find Anne on her website at annray.com. That's ANNREA.com, or makingartmakingmoney.com to check that out, because she is going to help you get past some of those resistances of being an artist who needs to make money, who needs to survive, or wants to get to that point where you do make money and you can do this as your full-time thing. But that again is for you on Thursday. Have a productive couple of days. I love you all. Thank you so much for making this whole 200 episode experience so much fun, and we will see you next time. I love you all. Bye. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to the podcast.